You're listening to the Navigating Magic podcast. This is the portal where we illuminate ways to weave ancient wisdom with modern knowledge in order to help ground your experience in this lifetime. I'm your host, Natasha Andreo, and I'm so grateful that you're here. Welcome back, everybody, to the next episode of my podcast. I have a special guest with us here today who happens to be a karmic astrologer and a teacher. Welcome, Caitriona.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, Natasha. And yeah, it's Caitriona. A lot of people think my name is Caitriona because of the spelling, but it's Gaelic. So it's Caitriona. Yeah,
Okay, noted. Thank you, Katrina.
no problem.
Now, you're joining us all the way from Ireland, and the reason I reached out to you is because you have such beautifully insightful posts on astrology, and there's so much of what you talk about that just has so much depth. So I would love to know, like, I'm going to go straight for the big question. How did you get into astrology?
Okay. So I hope you like long answers.
Yes.
But yeah, so how I got into astrology as a child, I was an avid reader. I read a lot as a child, and I grew up in a really like hyper religious home, and I don't know why the light has changed behind me there. Sorry. I grew up in a very religious home and it was like strictly Roman Catholic. And I had a bit of a crisis of faith from a very young age when I learned about the concept of hell and sin. And I started to just kind of intuitively explore other religions in the world and other belief systems. And at this point, I hadn't really discovered astrology, but I did discover Greek mythology and Roman mythology. And I understood that there was once people that believed in more than one deity. And this fascinated me because I was like, oh, so if you don't like your current god, you could potentially, honor a different god. I might have to move the light, Natasha. I don't know why that's happening. So, I got really, really fascinated by that, and that led me down a rabbit hole of being very obsessed with Greek and Roman mythology as a child, and later I got really into astrology, but I didn't actually recognize the correlation straight away. Astrology was interesting to me. I just knew I was a Cancer sun. But then the deeper I got into astrology, I realized that all the mythology I was into as a child was actually a wonderful foundation for astrology, and that I'd probably learned astrology the right way because rather than going straight into the zodiac, I learned the roots of astrology almost by accident, informally, just through my own kind of exploration of belief systems.
That's so interesting. So I can only imagine how that curiosity and intrigue from an early age, like the spiral that it led you down.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it definitely gave me comfort because I realized that, oh, okay, these Roman and Greek gods, they're quite capricious. They punished people too. And they were quite, even though like they were all, they weren't mortal, but they had quite mortal characteristics. And that was quite endearing for me. And they were very relatable from that point of view.
I guess now that I understand the path that led you to astrology, it makes sense why so many of your posts really get to the crux. The way like, I'm so obsessed with watching, like when I see that you've got a few stories
Hmm.
uploaded in a go, I just go, okay, I need to carve out some time because it's something that I really want to absorb. And
Oh, that's lovely to hear.
and in particular, the way that you have analyzed celebrity profiles, that has, like, I guess, sparked so much interest from people.
Yes, yeah. I think when I started my page, I was really reluctant to start my page because I had been doing astrology privately for a long time and I didn't feel confident enough to share, some of the ways I do things are a bit alternative and they might be the way traditional astrologers enter a chart. But I had received formal training, and my astrology teacher was so encouraging. He said, you know, you have something, you have to do this, you have to share it. And I needed that push. And a friend of mine who was also an astrologer, she had started and she said, come on, like start, just start. So they were watching the moon cycles and they elected a good time for me to start. I started and I didn't know what to do. So I went down the route of teaching because that was, you know, I suppose that was natural for me because I am a teacher anyway. I teach primary school children. That's my day job. And then I've always been interested in current affairs and celebrity news. Just not so much that I'm from a superficial point of view, but more from like a psychological point of view. What motivates these celebrities? So it made sense to look at their birth charts and shed a bit of insight into their personalities because their lives are in the public sphere anyway. You know, everybody knows, for example, what Jennifer Lopez is like, how she behaves. So when you look at her birth chart, you're merely confirming it when you're looking at celebrity birth charts, confirming the characteristics, confirming, you know, much of their life story. And I think it makes astrology quite real for people when they see you enter a chart in real time.
Absolutely. And there's so much resonance, you could say. And the big thing I think for people who don't necessarily know much about astrology is when we're able to, I guess, provide a bit more of an understanding or a nuance as to why certain things are happening with celebrity charts, like you said, because their lives are so public, people can't help but resonate with, oh, what's happening in my life? And I think that's how you draw in your clients.
100%, 100%, Natasha, because people will often message me afterwards and they'll say, I have Mars in the eighth house. And I really resonated with what you said about that. And you know, they say in astrology, don't isolate aspects, like don't isolate somebody, their sun in the seventh house. But if we're going to be real about it, when we all started learning astrology, that's where you start. And if you want to make astrology accessible to the masses, which is something I feel it should be, then you need to start from the very basics of looking at the house placements before you ever talk about the fact that they might have Mars square Neptune. Because you do lose people, I think, when you go in too complicated into a birth chart, even though the aspects are so important. Um, I tried to, especially in the beginning, I tried to enter the chart softly, and just point out little isolated things because it's very relatable. Then, as you mentioned, people can look at the chart and compare it to their own and gain some insight.
Absolutely. That's so true. Like on that note, I'd love to know what have been some of the biggest, I guess, aha moments for you when you're looking at a particular, maybe I'm putting you on the spot here, but like at celebrity charts, when some of the after effects become obvious in a chart.
By after effects, do you mean like things that happen after I've read the chart? Is it or
Yes. And by default, have you picked up on any nuances before certain things happening?
Yeah, I think what you mean, like when I'm doing a chart for a celebrity chart, especially the ones I do in my stories, I rarely prep them. I usually look at their elemental balance and then I just go straight in and record the stories, just keep it very natural. And as I'm going through the stories, I'm actually in real time going, discovering things myself. And then sometimes I will look back and be like, oh, I missed that or I missed this because, you know, I've just been isolating or jumping all over the chart, which is quite typical of me. But I do like, I remember their charts so well. And then I almost endear myself to these celebrities, even the ones that don't have great qualities. Sometimes they're controversial celebrities, but I read their birth chart and suddenly you gain so much empathy for them. And then when something happens in their life or when news happens in their life, maybe 2, 3 months down the road, straight away I'm pulling up their chart again to see how that affects them or how it's playing out. And for me, it's a learning opportunity both for myself and for the followers. Um, I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure if I answered it correctly.
No, I guess it makes sense. And I guess like you touch on something really important where you say like as things unfold, that becomes your best teacher. Like life experience is always going to be the most beautiful unfolding we could experience as astrologers. And it's something that you don't get taught that in astrology school per se.
Yeah, that's so true because I remember, doing all the formal training, and I remember, reading so many books, studying so many charts. But where did I learn the bread and butter? It was when I was reading charts blind, when I was doing clients' charts. And even before I did clients' charts, I would sometimes meet strangers. This happened a lot before I went professional. I would randomly meet strangers. I could meet them anywhere, a bus, a train, an airport, on a night out, in a smoking area, in a beer garden. And they would strike up a conversation, start talking to me. And straight away, I would be like, can I read your birth chart? And like, don't tell me anything about your life. And I would use it as a little, they were my guinea pigs. And I would test my theories on these strangers. I wouldn't have gotten every single thing right, but I made a note of things and I was trying to refine my talent and get better at what I was doing. And I think it all goes back to, astrology. The real learning of astrology happens when you start practicing it, when you start reading birth charts. And, no matter how many years you're doing it, you're never going to assume ever that you're going to get every single thing right, no matter how good you are, no matter how talented, because people interpret things. You've got your own internal bias when you're reading a chart as well. If I see Sun opposite Neptune in a birth chart, I think about issues and pain around the father figure, but that mightn't be the way it manifests for everyone, and there are other significations with that aspect as well. So it's an interesting one, but I definitely feel I learned so much in from actually the physical act of like generating a chart and delineating it and going through it myself. Like that has taught me so much more than the books ever taught me. And then as well, every day, and it was Cosmic Navigator that mentioned this, and it really changed my life. He said to see the planets, the transiting planets, as people in your life. And now, when I read my own transits, which I don't read that regularly, I'll be honest, I look at the planets and I think, who's Saturn in my life right now? Who's Jupiter? Who's Pluto? And it's really transformed the way I look at astrology
That is such a good
because it
take.
makes it so human.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really, I think, grounds the experience because often we can get caught up in the woo-woo and the metaphorical and the symbolic aspects of it, which can be
Mm-hmm.
very internalized sometimes. And sometimes it can be really painful when you're experiencing like a difficult transit. Because as we know, sometimes these transits can take so for some of the generational planets like 3 years almost with the retrograde
Mm-hmm.
back and forth. And so it's a deeply internalized process.
Huge, huge. And even like Pluto was in Capricorn for 15 years. And I was reminiscing about, that time recently. And I thought back to when Pluto entered Capricorn and identified the person who I feel was the Pluto and Capricorn person for me. And I was like, wow, that person was my Pluto and Capricorn person. And I was like, I'm going to be closing a chapter on that now this year. That person, is no longer actually in my life. But it was really groundbreaking moment for me because as you say, it just brought astrology down to life and it took away all of the vagueness that has always frustrated me about astrology and horoscopes and the zodiac and certain practitioners. The vagueness really really irritates me, and I suppose that is why I've always tried to have a lot of depth and authenticity and go in really deep and sometimes say things that people maybe don't expect me to say, because I appreciate depth and authenticity. I find superficial, surface level astrology very draining and very disheartening as well to the craft, because all of us could say something fluffy about the day. All of us could say, oh, there's a new moon in Gemini, it's a wonderful time to go out and socialize. Well, what about the square from Saturn? If what about, like, you go out and socialize and then the next day you wake up, you're late for work, and you get in trouble with your boss. So it's like, this is the thing. I feel like people appreciate the truth. Not everyone likes the truth, but most people appreciate the truth, even though it can be a little bit triggering.
Absolutely. And I think you're doing a very good job at pointing that out. I know recently you did a series of posts about, I can't remember which transit it was, but you did one for each of the rising signs. I think
Was
you did
it for
archetype.
Jupiter and Gemini or Saturn and Pisces? I've done Jupiter and Gemini was the last one, I think.
Yes. And I know that you did a disclaimer saying, I'm not, I don't like mundane astrology, but here we go. And then
Mhm.
the feedback that you received from people was just so relatable, just
Yeah. Yeah.
unbelievable.
It's so interesting because even though I'd massive resistance, and I still have so much resistance to writing horoscopes, I do know that horoscopes are they're lucrative. People love them. Magazines love them, newspapers love them. People consume horoscopes. But for me, I was like, I never found horoscopes good growing up. Even if I bought a magazine now and looked at a horoscope, and I know they're written for the rising signs, they never resonate. They never hit with me, because I'm just like, no, I'm just not feeling this horoscope. It's too vague. It's too fluffy. It's too watered down astrology. So now when I do write the horoscopes, I've so much kind of inner resistance to them. It probably helps me write them a little bit better and then make them a bit more relatable. I'm sure, some people probably read their horoscopes and like, no, that doesn't relate at all. But I think if you are someone that wants to go down the route of writing horoscopes for the general public, you do need to recognize that that's a big responsibility and not something to take lightly. And like, as you say, put a little health warning on it and tell people, look, I'm not into horoscopes, or take this with a grain of salt. You do need to get a private reading if you want a true horoscope.
Absolutely. That's so spot on. Something that I guess I've been meaning to, I'd love to go down this path is how the magic comes when you read for a client. They walk away and they're like amazed that what came up, but often the real magic comes, if not months, if not years later, where they've held on to things that you said, whether they've written them down or reread the recording or re-listen to it, and it's that one pinnacle moment for them that becomes such an aha, and they can't help but reach out. And obviously, as an astrologer, you learn to develop a relationship with your clients.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think when I first read charts professionally, I just assumed that people would listen to the chart and get back to me straight away. And some of them did, and some of them didn't. And I've read so many charts this year, and I would say half of the clients got back to me, the other half didn't. And in the beginning, I would make assumptions like, oh, maybe they weren't happy with their reading, or oh, maybe they just hated it. But then a few weeks or months have passed and they would get back to me. A lot of them do, and say, by the way, I love the reading. I've listened to it 10 times. And I'm like, what? You've listened to 10 times? You never even contacted me after it. And I don't do live readings. All my readings are pre-recorded. That was my own choice. I felt like I didn't want I didn't want to be distracted by another person looking at me when I was trying to focus on the chart. And I just find I read charts better without any interference. But I do know that, like, reading charts, I do think there's a huge benefit to live readings and that back and forth. But for me, I found, I would just be asking leading questions, because I have done face to face chart readings in real life. And I don't want to be an astrologer that asks leading questions. I just want to give the reading. And the beauty of giving the reading that way is that someone can listen to the reading like a podcast, with no interruption. They can go walk on the beach and listen to their reading 10, 20 times, and they can, as you say, gain something new from the reading on each listen and each time they play it back. And yeah, it's amazing that people re-listen to the readings, because I've had astrology readings done in the past, and I can tell you honestly, I've never ever re-listened to any of them. So it's lovely to hear from some of my past clients that, oh, I listened to your reading 10 times, 20 times, I've listened to it so many times. And then often they will recommend me to their sister or their mom or their brother or their husband, and they bring fresh clients my way, which is amazing. But yeah, it's lovely that people treasure their readings and that they take something from them. And I always say, when you're reading for someone, you're not telling them anything new per se. You're actually telling them the story of their lives, but you're telling it from a more objective stance. So they're like, oh, I've never heard it told this way before. And they recognize themselves in the story or aspects of themselves. And it's very life affirming to get a chart done in that respect.
Absolutely. I know exactly what you mean, because it can, I guess, it alters the perspective, and in a way, it becomes so affirming for some of the choices maybe that either you've made or you're about to make. And
Mm-hmm.
it helps put you on the onto this new trajectory of life. And there's nothing more affirming than, like, my big philosophy is, we're bringing the unconscious to the conscious. It's so
Yes.
affirming when you have a client say, yes, I'm already doing this, but it hasn't been brought to the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
And when they make
Yeah,
those connections to their chart, that's where the magic just comes out. It's a revelation.
it really is. And I mean, speaking from my own personal experience, I remember teaching myself astrology and maybe jumping all over the chart, which was kind of typical of me, and I still do it a little bit. And then, getting formal training and tying everything together and seeing my chart as a cohesive picture rather than all these different isolated elements. There were so many aspects of myself and my own like psyche and personality that I truly struggled with. And I felt, oh my God, like astrology helps me feel seen. Astrology helps me understand myself. And I know there is, you shared it recently about, it was a Carl Jung saying it's the equivalent of 18 therapy sessions. It's so true, because I suffered definite, and I still suffer with a lot of like, I would have a mind that is prone to obsession and like a lot of depth and intensity and almost intrusive like thoughts and having to go very, very deep. And I have Mercury square Pluto in my birth chart. And there was a lot of internalized shame around that when I was growing up. Why am I like this? Why am I replaying things in my head? Why am I obsessing over this inconsequential detail? And yes, you can go for therapy for all of these things, which I highly recommend. But astrology helped me understand that this is something that you can't really medicate it away. It's something you learn to transcend, it's something you learn to manage. You realize that, okay, my Mercury square Pluto is actually a gift if I can harness it correctly. But if I don't keep it in check, it can be, a very detrimental aspect, maybe to my mental health or to my well being, or it can be quite like a severe aspect in terms of how I relate to other people and how I communicate. So it was all about getting more awareness for me, self-awareness around, my own behavior and my own like shortcomings. And then when I started reading birth charts, I was like, okay, this is actually a really positive use of my Mercury square Pluto, because I can go digging here. I can go really deep. I can obsess over some tiny little detail in the chart, and I can use this incredible power of focus that I have and almost, exhaust that energy in reading birth charts. And that I realized that that was a very healthy expression of that aspect for me. And perhaps before I did birth chart readings, my obsession with astrology as well was a healthy manifestation of that aspect in my birth chart. And I think it was incredibly healing for me to learn that, the way my mind worked, not so much that it wasn't my fault, but that there was a reason for the way my mind worked the way it did, and that it was up to me to learn to manage my mind. And astrology um, gave me the gift of astrology was that it gave me that ability to look at myself more objectively for the first time in my life.
So beautiful. And something that, like, I guess that I took away from what you just mentioned is how sometimes people can think that, like astrology can be a bit abstract, a bit black and white. But in actual fact, we're more so, like, the way I like to describe it is, I'm going to put my hand out here, is we're on this spiral. And so you can look at Mercury square your Pluto as down here and be so rigid with it and see it as, okay, well, that's it. I'm doomed for the rest of my life. I'm stuck in this way. But when we learn to, I guess, tackle with some of the meaning behind it, we can spiral out of that negativity and that rigidity and move up and operate from that higher octave.
Yeah, like as you're saying there, you're like transcending, and I always say integrating. Like the older you get, you integrate these aspects more. They become part of your life. But I do think it's so valuable to learn it, because I met someone recently, looked at his chart, and he had moon square Pluto, and straight away I was like, my God, like he's gone through his whole life not realizing that the way he navigates feelings and the world and security is so unlike, let's say, the average person. Because how many people are walking around with Pluto square the moon exact? That's a very intense aspect. And yeah, I think it's so valuable to be seen, and for someone to say to you, look, this is why the way you are the way you are. And you don't have to kind of, the way people talk about curing themselves and fixing themselves, if we could reframe that to integrating these parts of ourselves and getting rid of all of the shame and the labeling around, people are called everything now from, you're not neurotypical, or you're ADHD, or you're all, there's so many different labels now. And even though the labels have a benefit, I do think as well that, maybe in the past people would have just looked at birth charts. And did we need the labels then, because the birth chart explained so much of how your brain worked and help people understand their cognitive functioning. Because, your reasoning power is going to be so different and so impaired if you have, let's say, a harsh aspect from Saturn or Pluto, and you're going to have to learn to manage that. And you can't really, well, maybe you can medicate these things away, but essentially you're numbing a part of your soul's blueprint, rather than like educating yourself about it and looking at, there's a positive to all of these hard aspects. In all of them there is a gift, but we have to usually go through the struggle first and dig through that dirt to find that diamond. And when you get to the point that you found the diamond, you're like, okay, now I have the diamond, but I also know that this diamond is quite sharp. I need to like maybe refine it a bit, work with it. And yeah, this is like when you get to that really good space to realizing that, this is who I am. There's no shame anymore about this. I can talk about this, and I can find peers as well. There are people out there who have this aspect as well. And there's a wealth of free information online. To be fair to the astrological world, they're so generous in the amount of information they share. And I know obviously you have to be discerning about free things that you read online. But if you Google any aspect, you're going to get a wealth of really great information, generously shared by wonderful astrologers online. And I think that, you know, there's no one way to interpret an aspect. So if you read all of the interpretations for moon opposite Saturn, you would find something there like that would resonate for you. Because all of the interpretations are very valid, including your own.
Absolutely. It's so much unfolding. It's so it's like my only wish is that every single person learns and understands their chart from a very young age, because our world would look so different if more of society did this.
Yeah, and I was in Nepal last year, and they told me that they do study astrology in school there. Vedic astrology is huge there, and I do think astronomy and astrology, they got separated at one point, but like I don't think it's so far-fetched to envisage a future where these two will come together again and be more respected. It's not that long ago that psychology, wasn't respected, that it was a pseudoscience. So I do think with Pluto now being in Aquarius, maybe over the next 20 years or so, like I do feel that there will be a shift coming, and that people are going to maybe move more towards what they consider new age thinking. The irony is it's really ancient astrology, it's older than nearly all of the major religions. But I do feel that people now more than ever, there's this spiritual hunger for meaning. Everybody's searching for meaning. And, people are trying to find meaning. They're going to the gym, they're running, they're doing intermittent fasting, they're meditating. There's so much craziness in the world. The world is so noisy now, so noisy. And all of us are trying to understand ourselves better and kind of become healthier and reach our potential. And astrology, it's such a cheat code for life. If you understand your own birth chart or have a basic even understanding of it, it's huge. Even I did a YouTube this week about Aries moons, and it was a number of participants. All of us had Aries moon, and Matt, Uranian astrologer Matt, was the moderator. And I wasn't sure how it would go because Aries moon, typically we have a bad rep, as being quite fiery, explosive, angry people, etc. But what happened in this little group is that I was chatting with a group of highly evolved, I would say, Aries moon natives that were so cognizant of the fact they had an Aries moon, so aware. And we all shared stories about, losing our temper when we were younger, being impulsive, getting in trouble, um, our hyper independence. We also shared stories about how we're very, very triggered by the vulnerable and injustice in the world, and how we find it hard to stay quiet about it. And when we dissected it and discussed it and really went deeper, I had this groundbreaking moment where I was like, why are Aries moon so triggered by, injustice and vulnerable people? It's probably because we were once that vulnerable child. We didn't get enough attention. We didn't have anyone to stand up for us. Because Aries moon, typically the mothers are very busy, dynamic, active, and the child becomes very independent and very self-reliant. And there's some aspect of needs are not met as a child. And then the Aries moon as an adult becomes this adult that sees any bit of injustice in the world. They get really angry about it and they become this activist. It's like, well, nobody's going to feel the way I felt as a child. And they just, they have a very low tolerance for seeing other people being treated bad, and that was kind of we came full circle with our discussion on Aries moon when we shared, our common traits and characteristics. But it was so life affirming to hear all of the other participants talk about their kind of strange relationship with their mothers, and their relationship to anger, and their relationship to impulsivity, and how they had kind of navigated life as an Aries moon. So, so interesting. So much there in that lived experience that we gain just from chatting to each other.
That's so insightful because, as you mentioned, it was a group of people who were very aware that they had an Aries moon. I've
Mhm.
got my sister who is unaware that she has an Aries moon. And
Oh,
oh my gosh, does this play out in every aspect of her life? Like every time I see her, she's just like, it's a new day, new problem. It could be Monday or Tuesday. She's like, okay, I've had my problem of the week now. It's like there's always something wrong. There's always a fire. There's always a fire to put out, or in some instances, a wildfire.
I know. And where do you know where her Mars placement is, Natasha?
Her Mars, I think, is in her third, no,
Oh yeah.
second house.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, yeah. And do you know what sign the Mars is in?
Let me check. I can check
Yeah,
quickly.
I'm just thinking there, Aries moon, I know that like if we talked about that in the discussion about how Aries moon needs a passion project, Aries moon needs to be busy. Like or an Aries moon that doesn't have something to do is a dangerous person. They need to be occupied, busy, dynamic, fulfilled, and they do need a cause to fight because we talked about this as well. If an Aries moon isn't passionate or fighting a cause, they will fight with their own fingernails, unfortunately. And I say that, from a place of just self awareness that I have found I get really passionate about causes. I remember in Ireland, maybe 5 years ago, I noticed that refugees were being treated really badly. And I was teaching their children, and I got really, really upset, and I got involved in, you know, trying to get better rights for the refugees living in Ireland. And then when everything happened in Palestine, I got really upset at vulnerable people in Palestine. And it's this like your logical brain knows I'm running a business. I shouldn't, get political. I shouldn't get involved in these advocacy groups. But your Aries moon overrides that and says you have to speak up for the vulnerable. You have to fight. You have loads of fire. You need to use it for other people who don't have the fire. And I think it's probably a healthier use of the Aries moon rather than, as you say, having a different problem every week,
That's
because
yeah.
that can be the case with an Aries moon, unfortunately.
Yes. I've got a testament to that. Her Mars is at 1 degree in Capricorn, second house.
Oh my God, like an exalted Mars as well. Wow. Yeah, so like I have my Mars in Capricorn too, but it's retrograde, so I think it might soften it a bit. And like I like Mars retrograde is very challenging, but I mean Mars exalted in Capricorn, they can be, ruthless in pursuit of their goals, can step on top of anyone to get to the top. So, so determined and ambitious. And then, having an Aries moon as a woman, I do think it's a challenging placement for a woman to have because it's a quite, in a way, it's quite masculine moon, you know. Um, Aries moon women can pretty much do everything themselves and don't, they can, other people can feel threatened too by their independence. And as well, if they're unevolved, they can be so self oriented to the point that they alienate other people. Like, I'll give you an example. I was in Italy and my brother was with me, and I went in our shared accommodation. I went and made myself a cup of tea. We love our tea in Ireland. And I sat back down, I was enjoying my tea, and he's a Taurus. He was like, "Did you just make a cup of tea for yourself and not offer to make me tea?" And I was like, "Yeah." He was so offended by this as a Taurus. And I was like, "But why didn't you just say, ask me, ask me?" And he was like, "I shouldn't have to ask you." And I was like, "But just ask me, I'll make you tea." But the Aries moon is like that. We're kind of so tunnel vision on ourselves. I need tea now. I'm going to make tea. And it wasn't from a place of selfishness that I didn't make him tea. It was from a place of being so self oriented. I was like, I need some tea now. I didn't see him ask for tea, so I'm going to assume he doesn't want it. But the Taurus, like, is so absorbed always with food and beverages. Was like, she made tea and didn't even offer me tea. So I had to make him tea as a way of apology. But there was no malice intended there at all. But it was, for me, it was like, okay, my Aries moon mightn't be the easiest person to travel with as a travel companion. I'm just going to make my own tea. So I do need to kind of be a bit more of a better, maybe relational, compromising type person, when I go places with people.
That's so fascinating. And I guess, like as an astrologer, because I know I do this, you can't help but start to, I don't like to say pigeonhole people, but you start to, I guess, detach from conflict because you understand why people are the way they are.
Exactly. Exactly. Like my best friend has an Aries stellium and she pops off regularly. And I never really react to her popping off. Well, I have an Aries moon anyway, so I have a high tolerance level for it. But when she pops off, I will just kind of observe her and listen. And then she's over it maybe 5 minutes later. Aries, we don't really stay mad for long at anything. But now, whenever once I learn of a friend or family member's birth chart, they become my little projects that I study and observe. Doing my little field research all the time. It's so bad, but you can't help it. Anytime like a new rising sign comes into my life, let's say a Virgo moon or Scorpio rising, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to observe this person now and learn everything I need to learn about that rising sign. So it's interesting just the way other people form like such they're like lab rats is a really bad word to use, but they do become lab rats in a way because and astrology can be a little bit intrusive in that sense, because we can obviously be like, oh, that's your Virgo moon or that's, and I try really hard not to talk all astrology with people that aren't into it because I know that it can be a bit alienating. One of my really, really good friends is an astrologer, and we love to chat. We could have a fluent conversation about every aspect of our lives through the medium of astrology. But I try not to do it, let's say, with friends and family and other people socially. I'm just taking mental notes a lot of the time now.
Yeah. It's a healthier way to be.
Mm, yeah, for sure, for sure.
And I know what you mean when you say it can be a little bit intrusive. Like I met a family on the weekend, and it was a social gathering, and two of the daughters happened to be twins, and they're in their early 20s. And when they found out I was an astrologer, they asked for me to read their charts. And I said, okay, this is going to be interesting because they're about 8 minutes apart. And so, as we know, there could be a lot of similarities, but I was looking for that one distinction in their charts. And once I found it, it was basically for the first twin, her Mars was in her eighth house. And the second twin, the younger twin, had Mars in the seventh house. And so it's a pretty big distinction there. And I said to the older twin, I said, oh, you've got a lot of I don't know how I worded it, but I said you've got a lot of drive and ambition to partner with other people when it comes to financial matters. And she stopped me then and there in my tracks, and she said, oh my gosh, I just bought a house with someone else, and the younger twin didn't buy the house, and she's just so okay with it. Like the younger twin, there was no jealousy, there was no competition between them, and it was just, this is what I'm doing and you go on to your path. And I just thought that was just a real aha moment for me.
Mm. It's incredible, isn't it? Like when you go into the charts and see that with twins. I have looked at twins charts before too. It's so fascinating, so fascinating, especially if there's a few minutes in the difference, in the like it's specifically for the rising signs, the way it affects it. And actually, one of the reasons I really got so into Uranian dial astrology is that because it really shows you the nuance between twins and stuff like that, because there's a way more factors involved in Uranian dial and so many trans Neptunians and asteroids, and it just kind of gives the chart a whole new distinct flavor, so to speak, that lets you go so much deeper.
Absolutely. It's amazing. Now, we've spoken a little bit about, I guess, how birth charts and how the nuances and how that can play out with like character archetypes and personalities. But I'd love to touch on the astrology of 2024, because confidently we can both say that about 80% of some of the biggest transits have already taken place,
Hmm.
even though we're not even halfway through the year technically. We had
Hmm.
a really big April month that I guess we're still, I don't think we've experienced the full ramifications of the eclipses and Uranus conjunct Jupiter transit in April.
Yeah, I mean, this year is huge, but the irony is that the subsequent years, the years coming, are even bigger, transformation wise, astrologically. I haven't looked that deeply at them yet, but I'm assured that they are quite intense. But yeah, 2024, I guess the big one really is, Pluto, and even just recently the trine with Jupiter is just massive. And then I think Saturn in Pisces, we're still very much in the middle of that story with Saturn in Pisces. What is Saturn in Pisces trying to teach us? That's the way I always look at with Saturn transits. What's the end goal here? What does Saturn want to teach us? Because I mean, all of us can agree what Saturn in Aquarius was trying to teach us, because of COVID pandemic and all the things we all had to learn so fast, thanks to Saturn in Aquarius. I do feel Saturn in Pisces, a bigger picture thinking is probably that it's trying to teach us something about, refining um our approach to maybe spirituality and the untangible. And as well, I feel like a lot of maybe fake gurus and people that aren't maybe practicing at the highest level or operating from, a good place, that those people might struggle with this, well, will struggle with the Saturn and Pisces transit, because it's going to expose them or test them. And, if you don't know what you're doing, if you're one of those people that maybe you've been selling, I don't know, tarot readings that are really vague, and maybe you've got a load of repeat clients and they're coming to you and they're abusing the readings and they're using them maybe as a crutch, and you set up a system where these people are vulnerable and they're totally reliant on you, let's say, for all of their life advice. Should I go on a date with this guy? Should I leave my job? Should I leave my husband? um I think these kind of practitioners, no disrespect to them, but I think Saturn in Pisces wants us to look at that kind of stuff and be like, is this healthy? Is this sustainable? And the same with astrology. I get people coming for readings. Should I leave my husband? Should I give this guy a chance? And I always say, I will never tell you what to do. You are your own, you have your own autonomy in life. I will talk to you about the transits, but you should never outsource your intuition to anyone. You don't outsource your intuition to anyone. And it's the same if you're going to a life coach. If a life coach tells you to leave your job, well, no, you don't outsource your intuition to a life coach. You make your own decisions. You're your own authority in life. And I do think Saturn and Pisces wants us to look at the explosion, let's say, around self help and healing that's happened in the last decade with Neptune and Pisces. And Saturn is like, let's really, really get serious about this now. What is like healthy for us to consume and what is not healthy for us to consume. And also, I guess with Saturn and Pisces, I feel that it's looking as well at addiction. Like currently, like I know I'm very addicted to my phone, very addicted to My Instagram account, even though like it's a business Instagram account, I'm trying to limit how much time I spend on it because I know I am consuming so much content, great content. But like I look at my phone, I'm like, oh wow, I've posted 3 stories, I've shared a post, I've liked so many posts, I've been on my phone for an hour, and like I still haven't taken the clothes out of the washing machine. And like it's getting dark. Oh my God. It's like I think a lot of us, that's for me, that's so there are some of the big themes of Saturn and Pisces, looking closer at maybe, what is healthy in our life and what is not, and then Jupiter moving out of Taurus and moving into Gemini, like a big thing that I don't think many people are talking about is all of the overthinking that transit causes, in, excuse me, when Jupiter moves into Gemini, it's so scattered. I have Jupiter in the third house natally, and I've got a very restless, busy mind, a lot of overthinking. And Jupiter in Gemini, will amplify overthinking and anxiety and scattered energy tenfold for everyone. And particularly, I would say for the air signs, and I think it's lovely to think about all the wonderful things the great benefic brings. And yes, Jupiter is going to bring us lovely things to the house it transits. But also, when Jupiter is in an air sign, it brings a lot of back and forth, a lot of noise, a lot of chatter, a lot of busyness. And Gemini is very, being a mutable sign, it doesn't have that stick with itness and it's very non committal. So the things that Jupiter and Gemini are bringing to the house, let's say the Gemini part of your birth chart, those things, we shouldn't really be striving for permanence. I feel, in that we should see it as like experiences. Jupiter and Gemini is bringing us experiences. But then Saturn and Pisces is coming in squaring Jupiter and Gemini, 2, if not 3 times, I think. So this is kind of where Saturn's going to be like, is this going to stand the test of time? This thing you're bringing in, Jupiter? Are you just going to be flaky again? Because, there's no point making false promises to this person and giving them all this stuff and then it not standing the test of time. So I do feel that, like, in a way, Saturn's influence is going to help Jupiter not get too carried away. Let's say, for example, you've Jupiter in the transit in your second house, you get like these wonderful job opportunities and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then Saturn comes and squares Jupiter and you realize that there is some fine print in the contract that you overlooked. And it's like that reality check. So I think that's coming in big time with Jupiter in Gemini. And yeah, the trine from Pluto in Aquarius um, is huge as well. That's huge because I think Jupiter is going to help Pluto in Aquarius bring in more of the things it wants to bring in. It's going to, like, Pluto in Aquarius wants to create all these changes. You see now we're all thinking about getting robotic lawnmowers. We're all kind of embracing AI a little bit more, even though, you know, I'm very reluctant. But Jupiter and Gemini is like, come on, try it, try it. It's that kind of energy. And then, like, I do think the second half of this year, Natasha, will be very intense. Let's say the end of August, start of September, with the American election. Even though I'm very slow to look at the birth charts of the candidates, I have looked at them before, but I don't want to look at them, to be honest, because I just find American politics is so divisive anyway. And America is going through its Pluto return. But I do think it's very significant that Pluto is retrograding back to Capricorn for that election. Very, very significant. There is a story there unfolding, something bigger than the election, something far bigger than the candidates. And something huge is shifting, something seismic is shifting in America. And unfortunately, America's economy affects all of us. We're all at the mercy of American politics. So I do think that, this is a year, I said this in my astrology forecast of the year. I think it's a year that all of us should be frugal and not like overspend, because I do think the economy is very fragile this year because of the upheaval that I foresee coming, let's say in America towards the end of the year. I just see there's a lot of instability, is what I would call it, instability. And then, we have, wars happening around the world as well, which aren't helping matters. And those are likely to continue anyway while the North Node is in Aries. And I think that when the North Node is in Aries, wars, even though nobody wants a war, the war and the conflict is very fated conflict that has to happen for a higher purpose that we can't yet see. And I always feel like, Mars, yes, Mars is a malefic, Mars is the god of war, but Mars is an agent as well of change. Mars has a goal and an ambition. And, Mars is not off in the sky doing its own thing. He answers to Saturn sometimes. He's squared for, we're coming up to a Mars square Pluto aspect, I think, in June now. So, these big players, they all they work together even though they don't want to work together. I always think that the planets are telling us, they're writing a story, and they're crafting something bigger that we can't yet understand or see. But like by the end of 2024, I feel like we will have a very good idea, like by Christmas 2024, of what the astrology of 2024 wanted to teach us, so to speak.
Mm. And I think in the next few years, we're in for some real changes. I don't think the world is going to look the same. And people who are so fixated on, or comfortable and resistant to change, I think they're going to struggle the most.
Yeah, fixed signs for sure are going to find it difficult because change is hard, very hard. And, I have my Mercury and my Venus in Leo, but, I do think, Pluto in Aquarius is coming in with all this seismic change that, as you say, we've never experienced before in our lifetime. We'll never experience it again. And it's just fixed signs. One thing I will say about fixed signs, it's really interesting. During World War II, there were loads of planets in the sky in the sign of Taurus. And during World War II, there was a wonderful resistance, throughout Europe and throughout the world, a really strong resistance, so patient, so enduring. And the resistance is the reason why, we were able to, let's say, triumph over evil, and the reason why World War II eventually ended, because the resistance was so strong. And one thing I always say about fixed signs is that they are the people of the zodiac that form the resistance. And we can see now with Pluto and Aquarius, all of the protests around the world, the resistance is coming back again. The resistance is forming, they're mobilizing. And what is it? It's this fixed energy of looking at stuff in the world, and rather than saying, oh, like, I'm not going to make any difference, these people are saying, no, we can make a difference. We're going to be the resistance. And if we have to take the streets every day for 10 years, we will do it. And fixed signs have the energy and the stamina to do this, because fire signs do not, mutable signs do not, and water signs, we'll write some poetry about it, maybe sing a song. But the fixed signs are wonderfully gifted at the resistance. So, we've just had Jupiter leave Taurus. So I feel like the resistance is well formed now. Pluto's in Aquarius. And, after Pluto's finished, Pluto has some work to finish in Capricorn. I do feel a lot of it, a lot of Pluto's work in Capricorn is very connected to probably, the exposing of governments and toxic masculinity, and maybe tackling misogyny and, those hierarchical structures in society that, haven't served us or have abused their power, traditional structures. Let's say, even for example, the banks. The banks, we know that the banks, didn't behave themselves. So, like, Pluto and Capricorn exposed all of that. Pluto is not yet finished his time in Capricorn. So, people that think, oh, oh, thank God that's over. I got away with that. Bad news. Pluto's coming back to Capricorn. And even, I spoke about this recently with P. Diddy's birth chart. He's got his Mars at 29 degrees Capricorn. He probably thinks he's gotten away with whatever transgressions he did in the past. I would say absolutely not, because when Pluto gets back to 29 degrees of Capricorn, I do feel, that man is going to be in a world of pain, that maybe he thinks he's over the hump, that he has escaped whatever consequences. If there's anything he's done, that is outside of his integrity, we'll say, Pluto in Capricorn is coming back one last time to pay him a visit, and I do think that Pluto at 29 degrees of Capricorn, that's the crisis degree, the anoretic degree. Some crazy stuff could potentially happen, let's say the end of this year, August, September, October, November. And we all kind of, as astrologers, I think we're all going to be watching with bated breath and learning too, because it would be a huge learning experience for us. Because sometimes, we big up transits and we're like, oh my God, it's going to be huge. But often we don't see, maybe until a few months later, how huge it was, the thing that transpired. Sometimes it's not like readily obvious. But yeah, I love the idea of the fixed signs taking to the streets, and not just the fixed signs, but all of us being influenced by the fixed energy to kind of have that stick with itness, to say, you know what, I'm not tolerating this anymore. Because I say once a fixed sign takes a stance and draws their line in the sand, it's very difficult to move them. And yeah, the change that is coming, it mightn't be comfortable change, but I guess it's necessary change.
Absolutely. You've touched on so much like inside. It's a literally sit back and watch this space.
Mm, it will be. It's actually very exciting astrologically, to look at the mundane astrology of the world and see things unfold. I mean, even if you think about Kate Middleton, she's unwell at the moment, and you think about Capricorn rules, uh, the royal family, that traditional structure, and Pluto and Capricorn now, how that structure has changed so much in the last few years. We've had Harry and Meghan leave the royal family, such a big scandal, and now we have Kate, battling a very serious illness. It's like the the way they were doing things in the royal family. Pluto and Capricorn has said, stop, you can't continue. Maybe, I do think as well they have a very grueling work schedule, very demanding. It's constant appearances. And I know they're very wealthy, but I wouldn't trade places with them for love or money to be a member of the royal family. Very difficult job. Pluto and Capricorn came in and was like, right, I'm going to revolutionize the structure because it's outdated. And it's quite, when you think about it, it's quite abusive as well towards the people that are born into that royal family. We saw, the side effects of that, even when it came to Princess Diana. It's a machine. The royal family. You have to go out there and smile and shake hands, even when you're suffering or really sad or ill or battling with your mental health. And we have kind of, even though the royal family is beautiful, and I know it's beautifully preserved, like all Capricorn things, and it's a beautiful tradition. Pluto and Capricorn says, no, there's toxic things going on here in this family that I want to expose, and it's not going to be pleasant. And by the time I'm finished, the royal family is not going to look the same. And we can see that, that's a very basic, I suppose, observation of the mundane astrology of Pluto and Capricorn. But I think it will be ultimately very good for the royal family once Pluto has finished his time there.
Yeah. Wow. It's again, I think the end of this year is going to be a real game changer. Once Pluto sets on his path in Aquarius and he stays there for the next 20 years, I think things that we have relied on and structures that we thought were going to be around forever, once they crumble and deconstruct, I think we're going to have to, run with the tide.
Exactly. And this is reflected too in human design. I don't know if you're that into human design, Natasha, but they were moving in human design as well in 2027 into a completely new era, in human design. And it's all about the structures changing, the structures we've relied upon. And I guess we have structures in place now, well, at least in the Western world, where if you can't work or if you're sick or, if you have a disability, the structures will protect you and keep you, quite safe. And human design is suggesting that there is going to be changes in the structure, towards welfare and things like that, that we are going to be getting more self-sufficient, self-reliant. I don't know how that's going to look. I don't know how money is going to change or the workforce. I do think though that we are going to see robots, replace people in a lot of spheres of life. So I do think, if you're in a job, a lot of people unfortunately are in jobs that they hate, that don't make their soul sing. And I do think, you could be in a job that's pretty mundane and you're just there every day and you're just there because it's secure and it's not ultimately something that is best for your soul's growth. I think those people are the most vulnerable now because Pluto and Aquarius is going to bring in so much innovation that if your job doesn't have an element of maybe scope for creativity or your own authentic personality, um, you're going to be replaced by a machine, quite possibly. And that is a bit frightening, for people. And you can decide, am I going to be a victim or am I going to be empowered? I do think people are going to have to be willing to change, be willing to learn new things, be willing to be more creative, be more niche. I think the more niche you can be in the next decade, the better. And even though I practice, my astrology is quite general, what I practice, I don't specialize in anything. I do think specialization will be very sought after. I am someone that I'm very good at synastry charts, but I don't love doing them because I often get clients that are going through bad, negative experiences in their relationship, and they want me to tell them to leave their partner, even though I can see in the synastry that this relationship is not working. So I have always held back from specializing too much in these various things. But let's say if you're someone that does children's charts, excuse me, or if you're someone that like specializes in astrocartography, or you're someone that you can sew by hand, or embroider cushions with somebody's name, those kind of things, those skills, let's say that machines can't really take away, you need to invest in those now. And I've actually, so interesting, since Jupiter inter Gemini, I've become obsessed with learning how to draw birth charts by hand. And
Hmm.
I've been looking up courses about it. And I was like, I really want to learn. And I was like, course with Jupiter and Gemini. But then I was thinking, wow, maybe, I need to learn to do them by hand so that I can actually hand draw a birth chart for someone. How amazing would that be in this day and age? And I know there are very few people that do that. But straight away, I was like, I want to do that now, because I'm so used to everything being computer generated. I want to be able to do this by hand so that I'm not relying on a computer. Because I do think in the future we're going to have internet outages. We're going to have, electricity blackouts. We're going to have like a system of money that might be a bit more universal. And I do think people will resist this, but I think it's coming, whether we want it or not, it's coming. And it will probably be harder to avoid tax. You know, people who do little nixers, it will be harder. I think, government control is something people will really resist. We're going to have increased government surveillance. Um, Everyday people, I mean, I know Chris Brennan was talking about there's some new product they're trialing. It's like a drone, and you grab hold of it and it flies you to the next place. So it's like a flying person, basically. Obviously they're for short distances, but like these are the things that are coming. Flying cars and things like that aren't that far away. you know there's so much changing. And the thing is, if we fly in cars and all of that stuff and more drones, you're thinking, well, what about all the conventional mechanics? All of those, it's not that they're going to be redundant. I don't think that at all. But I think that all of us are going to have to evolve at a very fast rate to keep up with the changes.
It's that's fascinating. A little bit scary to think what is, we're living in the Jetsons world now, in a way. But I think it was Maurice Fernandez, evolutionary astrologer.
No.
He speaks so eloquently about like Uranus being the higher octave of Mercury, and how Pluto is, ruler of the underworld, and it's bringing up things from the past and digging really deep. But Uranus is the god of the sky. It's like, what's happening up here? However, we can't be way up here if we're not grounded. And so
Mhm.
it's in that middle, that equilibrium, that balance in the middle, that we are going to find our path forward.
Absolutely. I really think that's so true. And I think as well, we'll see a move towards the digital detox. Yes, we're going to be super reliant on technology and our phones, but I do think more and more of us will be like, oh, my eyes hurt. I've been on my phone so long. I've been on my iPad, or I'm just, I'm sick of watching Netflix. We're going to really be like, you know what? I want to go meet people. I want to connect in real life. I want to go outside. I want to be in nature. I want to go off grid. Off grid is going to be, the buzzword for like the most expensive, lucrative like resorts now. No Wi-Fi, off grid. You're uncontactable. Like the perfect way to relax. That's going to be the future of relaxation, going off grid or going into places where your phone signal is blocked. I really truly believe that. And even people putting timing limits on, people are doing it already, but on their Instagram and their social media apps, because they realize it's so harmful. I'm on these apps so much. And I know some people think, oh, there's going to be a huge increase in online dating. I would be skeptical about that. I actually think it could surprise people. It could be the opposite. It would be more face to face. Like there might be online groups set up, right, everybody come here, we're going to have this singles day, but like it would be face to face. I feel like people are so sick of the online world. And I think as well with Saturn in Pisces, if you think of Pisces being the final sign, something is ending, for all of us this year and next year, a cycle, and collectively a cycle of maybe disillusionment is ending as well. And with Saturn and Aries, there's something really, really new coming, like this new cycle coming. I'm not exactly sure yet what it's going to look like, but yeah, it's going to be very interesting when it does come.
Gosh, it's so anticipatory. Watch with curiosity and excitement all in one.
Mm, for sure, for sure.
Caitriona, this has been a treasure of a conversation. You have so much, like I said, I started off by saying depth and insight, but my gosh, have you taken the trophy today? You've provided so much value and insight. Can you please let the listeners know how they can find you, how they can book a reading with you?
Oh, thank you so much, Natasha. It was so lovely being here. I didn't even feel the time pass because I was so engrossed in our conversation. So, the best place to find me is at Caitriona Astro. on Instagram. That's probably where I'm most active. I also have TikTok and I also have YouTube. And my website is caitrionaastro.eu if anyone wants to check out my services. I offer readings. I'm also selling a course at the moment on the shadow sign, and I have introduced accessible readings for Jupiter and Gemini, because readings are really expensive and inaccessible because astrology is so complicated. So for Jupiter and Gemini, I've introduced some shorter readings, like little sound bites, so that, if you're someone that you haven't been able to access your astrology because your income is a barrier, then don't let it be a barrier this summer. Go and use this Jupiter and Gemini energy to get the short readings. I don't know how long I'll do them for, but I'll definitely do them for the summertime anyway, just to celebrate Jupiter's ingress into Gemini and to get more people on board and aware of their own astrology. That's a real passion project of mine, just that astrology would be accessible to the masses, I guess.
That's such a clever idea. I really like that. So if you're listening to this and you're looking for a sign, this is it. Make sure you reach out to Caitriona.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Wherever you're listening from, if you can give us a review and a 5-star rating, that would be so helpful in supporting this podcast. If this lights you up and inspires you in any way, then please make sure that you share this episode with others and reach out to me and let me know. I'm beyond grateful and blessed to call this work. Together, we learn, grow, and evolve. Staying anchored in your heart means staying anchored to your humanity. All my love, Natasha.